You launch a new project. Maybe it's a new ministry or a massive community initiative.
Right, or even just a total career pivot.
Exactly. And you have perfect clarity. The vision is crystal clear to you.
You're just totally convinced.
Oh, absolutely convinced you're supposed to do this. You have that burning, undeniable enthusiasm. So, you launch.
And then reality hits.
Yeah, 2 months or maybe 2 years later, you are staring at a wall of absolute unyielding exhaustion. The funding dried up, or your team is infighting.
Or the people you thought would support you are like actively working against you.
Yes. And you are just standing there in the rubble of your own expectations thinking, I misheard. I made a massive mistake.
I was never meant to do this at all.
Right. If that specific quiet dread is familiar to you, if you are currently wondering if your hardship means you have completely lost the plot, you haven't. You've just hit the forge. Okay, let's unpack this.
It really is this absolute jarring collision between our initial pristine vision and the gritty, friction-filled reality of actually executing a calling.
And that's exactly what our source material today is all about.
100%. It is the precise focal point of our source material. We are looking at this profound theological manuscript titled Testing, Endurance, and Calling.
Which is such a heavy title, honestly.
It is, but it's an unflinching examination of what happens when that initial spark of purpose is subjected to the brutal realities of the world. And what's fascinating is that it doesn't offer any cheap comfort.
No toxic positivity here.
None at all. It completely bypasses modern toxic positivity and instead dissects the historical, psychological, and theological mechanics of how endurance actually functions.
And our mission for this deep dive is to figure out exactly how that works for you. We want to unpack how profound pressure, the kind that literally makes you want to quit, doesn't actually destroy a true calling.
Right, it refines it.
Exactly, it matures it. We want to equip you with a battle-tested framework for enduring these seasons. Because, let's be real, raw human grit eventually runs out.
It always runs out. You need divine grace for the long haul.
So where does the manuscript actually start? Because it comes out swinging.
It really does. It opens by taking a sledgehammer to what is arguably the most pervasive and damaging misconception anyone carries into a new endeavor.
The illusion of the smooth path?
Yes, the illusion of the smooth path. There is this deep-seated, often totally unspoken assumption that if a calling or a mission is genuinely sanctioned by God, well, the path forward is naturally going to be clear of obstacles.
It's the rocket ship expectation. I think about this all the time.
Oh, I love that analogy. Explain that.
Well, you think you've got the divine coordinates, right? You strap yourself in, the countdown finishes, and you expect this incredibly smooth, majestic blast-off straight into the stars.
Just coasting into orbit.
Right. But instead, the doors lock, the temperature starts rising exponentially, the pressure builds, and you realize you aren't in a rocket at all.
You're trapped in a forge.
You are trapped in a forge. And my question for you is, why do we default to panic in that forge? Like, why do we instantly equate efficiency and a lack of friction with divine favor?
What's fascinating here is how the manuscript diagnoses the psychology behind that exact panic. It calls this state unformed zeal.
Unformed zeal.
Wow. Unformed zeal is highly energetic, but it lacks a structural understanding of how transformation actually occurs. Psychologically, we live in an era that completely worships efficiency.
Oh, speed and immediate return on investment. Everything has to be instant.
Exactly. If I click a button, a package arrives tomorrow. If I send a message, I get an immediate reply. And we have subconsciously projected those modern economic expectations onto our spiritual lives.
And onto our sense of calling.
Right. We conflate God's favor with modern momentum. We assume that blessed means unhindered.
So in our heads, if the numbers are going up and the people are happy and the money is flowing, God is smiling.
Basically, yeah.
But if there's a delay or if, a donor backs out or there's sudden conflict, we instantly read that as a red light.
Precisely. Disappointment very quickly metastasizes into doubt. But the text argues something incredibly counterintuitive here.
What?
That the danger isn't the hardship itself. The deeper danger lies in interpreting that hardship wrongly.
Oh, wow. So assuming the difficulty means abandonment.
Right. When we misinterpret the forge as a failure, we abandon the process entirely. We jump ship when God is actually just training the soul.
So to counteract this, the manuscript provides a historical reality check, right?
It does. It walks through the foundational figures of biblical history to prove that a genuine calling rarely exempts a person from hardship. In fact, historically speaking, a calling is the exact mechanism that positions them directly into it.
I really want to look at those historical case studies
Yeah.
because we tend to read these ancient texts with a sort of glossy, retroactive filter.
We definitely do. We know how the stories end, so we minimize the middle.
Exactly. But the text doesn't let us do that. It forces us into the messy middle.
Take Moses, for example.
Yeah.
The manuscript highlights the sheer psychological whiplash of his life.
Whiplash is the perfect word for it.
Right. He has the ultimate moment of clarity. An audible voice from a burning bush telling him exactly what to do. He is called to liberate an entire nation.
Talk about a clear mandate.
But look at the immediate aftermath. He goes to Pharaoh, and not only does Pharaoh say no, he increases the brutality of the Israelite slavery.
He makes them gather their own straw for the bricks. It actually gets worse because Moses showed up.
Exactly. Moses' immediate obedience results in immense suffering for the people he is supposed to save. And even after the liberation, he doesn't get a victory lap.
No, he gets a literal desert.
40 years of wandering in a desert, managing the incessant complaints, rebellions, and idolatry of a massive, deeply traumatized population.
So his calling was clear, but the execution was an administrative and emotional nightmare.
Absolute nightmare.
Or take David. And this is where the timeline of calling versus the timeline of comfort really messes with our modern sensibilities, I think.
Oh, the waiting period for David is staggering.
Right. He gets the anointing. The prophet literally pours oil on his head and says, "You are the rightful king."
And if that happened today, we would expect him to be sitting on the throne by, like, Tuesday.
By Tuesday afternoon. But instead, he spends over a decade living as a political fugitive.
And we really have to consider the sociological and psychological toll of that. David is hiding in caves. He is constantly looking over his shoulder.
Knowing the current administration is actively hunting him with a standing army.
Yeah, he has to fake insanity in a foreign country just to survive. The manuscript points out that his anointing preceded his comfort by a very long, very dangerous margin.
So the calling didn't prevent the cave. The calling is what put him in the cave in the first place.
Exactly. And Joseph is another perfect example. He has these vivid, prophetic dreams of leadership.
Right, he sees his family bowing down to him. It's this grand vision of prominence.
But what is the direct chronological result of sharing that vision? His brothers throw him into a pit, they sell him to human traffickers, and fake his death.
It's just horrific.
He ends up in a foreign country, works his way up, gets falsely accused of assault by his boss's wife, and is thrown into a dungeon where he is completely forgotten for years.
Forgotten for years. And then there's Jeremiah.
Oh, Jeremiah. He was appointed as a prophet to the nations. His job was to warn his society of impending collapse.
The weeping prophet.
Yes, his entire career is characterized by weeping, rejection, and profound isolation. He is mocked, thrown into a muddy cistern, and ignored by the very people he is trying to save.
And of course, the ultimate example the text points to is the life of Jesus himself.
Right. He was perfectly obedient, perfectly aligned with the divine will.
Yet that obedience led him directly into temptation in the wilderness. Rejection by his own hometown, betrayal by his closest friends.
And ultimately, a brutal public execution. The cross.
Wait, okay, I have to push back here.
Go for it.
Because if we are saying that a true calling practically guarantees you're going to end up in a metaphorical cave or a dungeon or on a cross, doesn't that cross the line into masochism?
That's a really fair question.
Like, if we're just accepting that everything is going to be miserable, aren't we just romanticizing burnout? Giving ourselves a spiritual excuse for why things are failing?
That is a crucial distinction to make, and it's one the manuscript handles very carefully. It is absolutely not romanticizing pain.
Okay, good.
And it is not suggesting that, all failure is a sign of divine favor. Sometimes things fail simply because of poor planning, arrogance, or just plain incompetence.
Right, sometimes a bad business model is just a bad business model.
Exactly. But the text is drawing a strict boundary between the natural consequences of her own hubris and the inevitable friction of challenging the broken status quo.
So it's not masochism.
No, it is the dismantling of the false self. The manuscript notes that the deepest, most identity-shaking discouragements in a purpose-driven life often come not from open moral failures, but from confused expectations.
What do you mean by confused expectations? Break that down for me.
Well, it gives the example of a leader who steps into a new initiative. Let's say a missionary moving into a new culture. They have sacrificed their comfort, their geographic proximity to family, their financial earning potential, and subconsciously they expect that because they made those huge sacrifices, the culture they are entering will immediately recognize their goodwill.
They expect a parade, or at least spiritual receptivity.
Right. But instead, they face deep suspicion, linguistic barriers, and cultural resistance.
And when that breakthrough doesn't happen on their timeline, they don't just feel tired, they feel betrayed.
Yes, they think, I did my part of the transaction, why isn't God holding up his end?
They mistake the friction of a broken world for a withdrawal of divine favor. That is so common.
Which is why the author of this manuscript insists that endurance is not just a supplementary skill you learn on the side, endurance is the actual curriculum.
Wow. Endurance is the curriculum.
If you believe the chief purpose of your calling is to make you successful, visible, or comfortable, then testing feels intolerable. It feels like a glitch in the software.
Like something has gone terribly wrong.
But if you accept the historical reality that testing is the mechanism meant to forge your character, then the pain becomes intelligible.
It doesn't stop hurting, but it stops being meaningless.
Precisely.
Okay, so if this furnace is actually purposeful, if it's meant to refine us rather than just indiscriminately burn us to ash, then we have to look really closely at the structural integrity of what is actually being put into that fire.
Yes, we do.
Which brings up an image from the text that I've heard, I don't know, 100 times, but the way this manuscript unpacks it completely changed how I see it.
You are referring to Paul's theology in his second letter to the Corinthians, chapter 4, verses 7 through 18.
Yes, that's the one.
This passage really serves as the structural load-bearing wall for the entire manuscript. Paul writes, "We have this treasure in jars of clay to show that the surpassing power belongs to God and not to us."
Treasure in jars of clay.
Exactly. To understand the absolute weight of this, we have to understand the first century context. A clay jar, or a terracotta pot, was the most mundane, inexpensive, everyday item imaginable.
It was like the ancient equivalent of a cheap plastic container.
Exactly like Tupperware. They chipped constantly. If you dropped one, it shattered into a dozen pieces. They were unremarkable, easily replaced, and inherently fragile.
And the text emphasizes that this is the vessel God chooses to represent the human servant.
Yes. The vessel is cheap. The treasure inside, conversely, is the light of the gospel, the truth of calling, the very presence of God. The treasure is of infinite, eternal value.
Okay, hold on. I'm struggling with this concept. From a purely strategic risk management perspective, this is a terrible strategy.
It really seems like it, doesn't it?
Like, if I am a CEO or a project manager and I have an asset that is completely priceless, something the entire mission literally hinges on, I am not putting it in cheap, brittle pottery that shatters if you look at it wrong.
No, you'd protect it.
I'm putting it in a titanium vault. I'm surrounding it with biometric locks. I'm building redundancies. Why would God build a delivery system with such an obvious single point of failure? Namely, my incredibly fragile physical and mental limits.
That tension you are feeling right now is exactly the point. The manuscript argues that this is the precise intersection where human logic and divine logic violently diverge.
Okay, walk me through that divine logic.
Think about the psychological outcome of your titanium vault strategy. If God only entrusted this profound work to people who were emotionally indestructible, intellectually flawless, and perfectly resilient.
People who never got tired, never had doubts, and never snapped under pressure.
Right. What would happen?
Well, people would look at the work and they would marvel at the vault.
Exactly.
Like say, look at how brilliant that leader is. Look how strong that founder is. Look at their incredible emotional intelligence and insane work ethic.
The vessel would absorb all the glory, and the treasure would just become an afterthought. The brilliance of the human container would eclipse the divine nature of the content.
Oh, wow. I see where this is going.
Because the vessel is made of clay, because it is so obviously fragile, prone to fatigue, and easily cracked by the pressures of life, any lasting impact, any enduring light that shines out of it is unmistakably credited to the treasure inside.
The fragility isn't a design flaw.
No, the fragility is the strategy. God doesn't require his servants to be made of steel. He requires them to be porous and faithful.
Honestly, that is a massive relief.
Isn't it?
Because I think the pressure to be the titanium vault is what burns so many people out in the first place. You feel like you have to be completely impervious to criticism, completely immune to exhaustion.
The manuscript makes a brilliant observation here. It notes that thousands of leaders and servants are quietly bleeding out because they're trying to be both the vessel and the treasure simultaneously.
Oh, that is so true.
They act as though the eternal weight of the mission depends entirely on their own charisma, their strategic brilliance, or their emotional reserves.
They live in constant terror that if they show a single crack, the treasure will leak out and the mission will fail.
But Paul's life and the specific vocabulary he uses proves the exact opposite.
Let's get into Paul's specific vocabulary, because he isn't speaking from an ivory tower here. When he talks about the fragility of the clay jar, he is speaking from a place of immense physical and psychological trauma.
Yes, he is. The text walks through Paul's catalog of hardships. He endured brutal physical beatings, multiple imprisonments in horrific conditions.
The shipwrecks, right?
Shipwrecks where he was stranded at sea, riots that he barely escaped, and seasons of total starvation. He lived in a constant state of hypervigilance.
With nonstop external pressure.
Yet in this passage, he pairs his profound human vulnerability with absolute divine preservation. He says, "We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed."
I want to zoom in on one specific word in that list. Perplexed.
It's a great word.
Perplexed, but not in despair. I think that is where the vast majority of our listeners actually live. Most of us aren't facing shipwrecks or physical persecution. But we are deeply, profoundly perplexed. We are staring at a closed door that we swore God opened. We are looking at a fractured relationship in our community that makes no sense.
Or wondering why the funding fell through at the last possible second.
Yes, we are living this thick fog of confusion.
And what's fascinating here is how the text reframes that perplexity. In many modern, performance-driven spiritual communities, perplexity is treated as a symptom of weak faith.
Like it's a character flaw.
Right. If you are confused, the assumption is that you must be out of alignment, or you aren't praying hard enough, or you harbor some hidden, unconfessed doubt. But the manuscript argues that perplexity is actually a holy threshold.
A holy threshold. How so?
Because it is the exact geographical coordinate where human explanation reaches its absolute limit and true reliance begins.
Oh, I love that.
Think about the neurological response to confusion. When we don't understand something, our brain signals panic. We want to resolve the dissonance immediately. We want to solve the puzzle.
We want to be back in control.
Exactly. Paul is saying that you can exist in a state of profound cognitive dissonance. You can be utterly bewildered by the circumstances of your life and still not surrender to despair.
You don't have to possess all the answers to possess faith.
Precisely. You can be deeply confused by your current season and still be firmly anchored to your calling.
That completely dignifies those seasons when we feel totally depleted.
It really does.
The text points out that testing isn't just the external stuff. It's not just the logistical nightmares or the difficult coworkers. It's the quiet, crushing internal narratives.
Those are often the hardest to survive.
It's those whispers at 2 a.m. that say, God has completely forgotten me, or I am fundamentally not enough for this, or I should have quit while I was ahead.
The clay jar metaphor takes those moments of inner fragility and says, of course you feel like you are cracking. You are made of dirt and water. That is your nature.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the manuscript draws this incredibly sharp, incredibly uncomfortable line between two concepts that, on a sunny day, look absolutely identical.
Ambition and vocation.
Yes, ambition and vocation.
This is one of the most vital distinctions in the entire text. In seasons of ease, when the economy is good, when the church is growing, when the startup is getting funded, ambition and vocation are almost indistinguishable from the outside.
Because both produce hard work.
Both produce hard work, both produce vision, both produce incredible momentum.
Let me try an analogy here. Think of a massive suspension bridge.
Okay.
When it's 75 degrees and sunny and there are just a few sedans driving across it, you cannot visually tell if the concrete pillars have internal flaws. It looks magnificent.
Sure.
But structural engineers don't base their safety reports on how a bridge looks on a sunny day.
Yeah.
They run stress tests.
Right.
They don't drive fleets of heavy overloaded trucks over the bridge because they want to destroy it.
They do it because they need to reveal the microfractures deep inside the concrete.
Yes. They have to find the hidden weaknesses before those flaws cause a catastrophic, fatal collapse under real-world pressure.
That is exactly what the furnace of delay, obscurity, and hardship does to the human heart. It is a stress test.
A spiritual stress test.
As the text points out, Fire does not create gold. You cannot throw a block of lead into a furnace and magically extract gold. Fire merely reveals the gold by burning away the dross,
The impurities.
the hidden alloys that weaken the metal. The furnace exposes the true motives that were already present but heavily camouflaged by comfort and success.
So under the immense pressure of that stress test, how do we distinguish between the microfractures of ambition and the solid concrete of vocation?
It comes down to the core questions the soul instinctively asks when the momentum completely stops. Ambition is, at its root, fundamentally self-referential.
It's all about me.
Right. When the pressure hits, ambition asks, how do I protect my brand? How do I ensure I still get credit? How do I maintain my influence? How do I spin this failure so I don't look bad?
Wow, that hits close to home. And vocation.
Vocation, on the other hand, is fundamentally submissive and obedient. When the pressure hits, vocation asks, how do I remain faithful in this obscurity? How do I serve the people right in front of me, even if no one is watching? How do I honor God in this specific, hidden season?
You really can't tell which one is driving the bus until the applause stops.
You really can't.
The text talks about the agonizing experience of delayed fruit. When you are laboring and laboring, pouring your heart into a community or a project, and the metrics are flatlining.
And your peers are passing you by.
Yes, it forces a very severe, very clarifying question.
Uh-huh.
Are you serving God because you love the gifts, the visible success, and the identity He provides you? Or are you serving Him for Himself?
It exposes our hidden idols with surgical precision. The manuscript specifically names a few of these idols, too.
Which ones?
The desperate need for external approval, the addiction to forward momentum, and the illusion of control. When you strip away human applause, you find out very quickly if your identity is anchored in God or in your own performance.
That is terrifying.
When your organizational efficiency fails, you find out if your foundation was actually deep prayer or just really good middle management.
There's a specific line in the text regarding this that just stopped me in my tracks. It says that loving receptive people is easy, but loving resistant, complicated people is what proves the depth of a calling.
It is the ultimate diagnostic test for vocation over ambition. Ambition curates its environment.
It wants to surround itself with people who make the leader look brilliant.
Right, people who respond quickly to instruction, who validate the leader's effectiveness. Ambition views people as instrumental. They are stepping stones to a goal.
But vocation requires you to stay in the room with people who are profoundly messy.
People who deeply misunderstand your motives, people who actively, sometimes maliciously, resist the very help you are trying to give them.
The text points back to the cross for this.
It does. Jesus washed the feet of the man who was hours away from selling him out to be executed. If your calling is genuine, it will eventually demand that you take the shape of the cross.
It will require sacrificial, non-transactional love for incredibly difficult people.
Exactly.
And it's so easy to preach about grace, but it requires a supernatural rewiring of your nervous system to actually live it out when someone is actively working to dismantle your reputation.
It's the hardest work there is.
So if this furnace is meant to burn away our ambition and forge true vocation, we need to look at historical case studies of people who actually survive the fire. We need to see what this endurance looks like in different personalities.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the manuscript offers 3 distinct historical archetypes of biblical endurance.
Who are they?
It draws these from the early days of the Christian church, specifically looking at the narratives in the book of Acts. It analyzes Paul, Barnabas, and John Mark.
And these aren't just dry historical biographies.
No, they represent the varying architectures of endurance that exist in different seasons of a calling.
Let's start with Paul, because he is the absolute poster child for what the text calls cruciform, mission-shaped suffering.
He really is.
We touched on his list of hardships earlier, but the text zeroes in on one specific, highly violent incident in a city called Lystra.
Yes, recorded in Acts chapter 14. To understand this, you need to understand the cultural volatility of Lystra. Paul and his companion Barnabas are preaching there, and they perform a miraculous healing.
And initially, the crowd is thrilled.
Right. They are so amazed they think Paul and Barnabas are literal Greek gods, Hermes and Zeus, and they try to offer animal sacrifices to them.
Which Paul obviously rejects.
Violently rejects. He tells them they are just men, but shortly after, antagonists from neighboring cities arrive and completely flip the narrative. The crowd turns from wanting to worship Paul to wanting to execute him.
It is a terrifying display of mob psychology.
It happens so fast, they drag Paul out, stone him, and leave him outside the city gates, entirely convinced they have killed him.
And I want to pause on the reality of a stoning. We hear that word and think of, like, people throwing pebbles.
It's not pebbles.
No. This is a brutal, chaotic, blunt force execution. It is designed to crush bones and cause massive internal trauma. Paul is battered, bleeding, and likely unconscious.
Presumed dead by a mob that just tried to kill him.
Right, and the text points out something incredible about how the historian Luke records the aftermath.
Yeah.
There is absolutely no dramatic, sentimental commentary about Paul's inner trauma or his heroic willpower.
Not at all.
It simply notes that the disciples gathered around his presumed corpse. He got up and he walked back into the city.
He walked back into the exact geographical location of his trauma.
It is mind-blowing. It proves a massive point the manuscript makes regarding endurance. Courage is not the absence of pain, and is not the absence of neurological fear.
Right. Courage is the deep, overriding conviction that the call remains, even when the physical body is broken. He wasn't indestructible. He was just anchored to an authority heavier than the stones that hit him.
That is a quintessential Paul model of endurance.
It is dramatic, it is forceful, it is highly visible, and it is pioneering. It is the ability to absorb massive frontal assaults and keep marching forward.
And the text makes a very sharp cultural critique here, doesn't it?
It points out that modern leadership culture absolutely worships the Paul model. We write books about the solitary, unbreakable visionary who takes the hits, defies the odds, and changes the world. We idolize that stoic resilience.
But the problem is, if we only idolize the Paul model, we alienate 90% of the people actually doing the work.
Which brings us to the second archetype. The text argues we completely neglect the Barnabas model.
Let's talk about Barnabas.
Barnabas represents a completely different but equally vital sociological and spiritual form of endurance. His given name was Joseph, but the early church nicknamed him Barnabas, which literally translates to son of encouragement.
What a great nickname.
Right. His primary expression of endurance wasn't surviving literal execution attempts. It was expressed through immense relational steadfastness, patient advocacy, and the slow, unglamorous work of stabilizing other people.
He's the ultimate bridge builder. I mean, think about his history. When Paul, who used to be Saul, the man actively hunting and murdering Christians, claimed he had converted, the entire early church was terrified of him.
They thought it was a trap.
Naturally. But it was Barnabas who spent his relational capital to step in. He believed in Paul before he was a proven commodity, and he vouched for him to the leadership.
Barnabas's endurance is the willingness to stay near the wounded, the suspect, and the unfinished.
And we have to recognize the immense emotional labor that requires to consistently see potential in people before it is obvious.
You patiently invest your time in someone's excruciatingly slow transformation.
To absorb the messy, frictional reality of community life without letting it turn you into a cynic, that requires a massive, deep well of endurance.
A community or a church or an organization cannot survive on Pauls alone. A room full of Pauls will eventually burn the building down.
It desperately needs the Barnabases, the people who endure by encouraging the weary, de-escalating conflict and restoring perspective.
Which perfectly sets up our third historical archetype. Because Barnabas's specific brand of patient advocacy is put to the ultimate test with a young man named John Mark.
And I have to ask you about this, because John Mark's story is the one that gives me the most hope.
Why is that?
Because John Mark literally quit. He was on a high-stakes missionary journey with Paul and Barnabas. They hit a point of severe difficulty, and John Mark just bailed.
He walked away from the calling and went home.
And it caused such a massive, irreconcilable fight between Paul and Barnabas later on that they actually dissolved their partnership over whether to give him a second chance.
Paul said no, Barnabas said yes.
Exactly. So how does the text frame John Mark's failure and the fact that years later Paul explicitly writes, "Get Mark and bring him with you, for he is very useful to me"? What is the mechanism there for the listener right now who feels like they've already completely blown it?
Like they've quit when things got hard and there is no path back.
Yes.
Yes.
What does this story say to them?
The story of John Mark is one of the most profound, practical examples of the theology of restoration in the entire biblical narrative. The text does not sanitize his failure.
It doesn't pretend it didn't happen.
Right. John Mark's defection was real. It caused actual logistical damage to the mission, and it caused a severe relational rupture between two giants of the faith. Paul's initial fury was arguably justified from a strategic standpoint.
Paul was looking at the mission, Barnabas was looking at the man.
But the profound lesson, the mechanical reality of grace, is that the early church, facilitated by Barnabas's advocacy, did not allow John Mark's worst, most cowardly chapter to become his permanent, defining identity.
His failure was real, but it wasn't fatal.
Precisely. We often define endurance as gritting your teeth and never ever quitting no matter what. But the text expands the definition.
How's that?
Sometimes endurance is having the agonizing humility to return after you have failed.
Oh, man. That takes guts.
It takes immense psychological courage to walk back into a community or back into a calling, knowing full well that you let people down, knowing that people like Paul are skeptical of you, and voluntarily submitting to the incredibly slow, humbling process of rebuilding trust.
John Mark's story is proof that a setback is a chapter, not the conclusion.
God is not hurried by our timelines, and he is certainly not confined by our initial failures. He can forge endurance out of repentance just as easily as he can out of stoicism.
So we have Paul enduring the stones, Barnabas enduring the messy emotional labor of people, and John Mark enduring the shame of failure to eventually return.
3 totally different paths of endurance.
But all of this highlights a massive internal battle. How do you actually survive the psychological and emotional toll of this furnace? Because the outline and the text are both absolutely adamant that biblical endurance is not stoicism.
This raises an important question, and perhaps it is the most critical pastoral and psychological question of the entire manuscript. How do we speak to God and to each other when we are actively in the fire?
Because it's not about just toughing it out.
The text insists that true endurance is not emotional suppression. It is not a clenched jaw. It is not pretending you aren't bleeding. And it is certainly not the modern plague of toxic positivity.
True. Sustainable biblical endurance requires a practice the modern church has largely forgotten, or perhaps willfully ignored, the practice of lament.
Yes, lament.
Let's talk about toxic positivity for a second, because I want to use a medical analogy to explain how dangerous it is. Toxic positivity is like taking a handful of powerful painkillers for a completely shattered femur and then deciding to run a marathon because you technically don't feel the pain anymore.
You're just masking the symptoms.
Exactly. You might be smiling, you might feel great, but with every step, the bone is grinding itself to dust. You are causing catastrophic, irreversible structural damage beneath the surface.
And lament is the opposite.
Lament, on the other hand, is the agonizing process of setting the bone. It hurts immensely. You have to acknowledge exactly how broken it is, but it is the only way the structure can actually heal and bear weight again.
That is a phenomenal analogy for the psychological and spiritual mechanics at play. The text argues that when religious communities force people to smile through their pain, when they demand that every prayer end with a neat, victorious bow, they eventually drive people toward 2 terrible, inevitable outcomes.
What's the first outcome?
The first is cynicism. When your internal reality is screaming in pain, but your external community demands a smile, you eventually conclude that God is either blind to your reality or he just doesn't care.
And the second outcome?
Complete emotional numbness. To survive the cognitive dissonance between what you feel and what you are allowed to express, you simply shut down your emotional receptors entirely.
Because you cannot selectively numb your emotions,
Yeah.
right? If you numb the grief, the anger, and the despair, you inadvertently numb the joy, the peace, and the love. You just become a walking shell.
Exactly. And this is why the manuscript explains that lament is absolutely critical for longevity in any calling. Lament, which is honest, raw, unstructured prayer in the presence of intense pain, is not a loss of faith.
It feels like it sometimes, though.
It does, but it's the exact opposite. Crying out, "How long, O Lord?" or screaming, "Why have you forsaken me?" is an act of profound, active faithfulness.
Is faith refusing to let go of God in the dark?
It is bringing the real, bleeding, fractured condition of your soul into the presence of the only one who can heal it, rather than hiding it behind a brittle religious mask.
Faith refusing to let go of God in the dark. That is incredibly powerful. The text quotes some of the raw realities of ministry that require this kind of lament.
Like the silent, seemingly unanswered seasons of prayer.
The grief of watching people make destructive choices. The profound, unique loneliness of leadership where you carry secrets and burdens you can't share with anyone else.
The manuscript issues a severe sociological warning here. Communities and churches that do not have a theology of lament, that do not allow space for unresolved grief, become structurally brittle.
They just snap under pressure.
If you are only fully accepted in your community when you are victorious, smiling, and succeeding, then the moment real, unresolvable pressure hits, the community will fracture.
The author makes a profound contrast here, don't they?
Yes. On one side of the spectrum, you have the frantic, exhausting frenzy of trying to manufacture certainty and fake momentum to prove God is with you. On the other side, you have the dark despair of assuming that God's silence equates to his total absence.
But true faith, enduring faith, is the third way.
Yes. Faith is the third way.
Oh.
It is the agonizing but stabilizing practice of waiting for clarity while continuing to obey in the dark.
It is the ability to look at your circumstances and say, I am deeply confused, I am hurting, I do not understand why this door closed or why this person left, but I will still trust the character of God and I will take the next tiny right step.
That is the essence of endurance.
So what does this all mean for our daily habits? Because the text makes a striking paradigm shifting point. Under the immense pressure of the forge, spiritual disciplines stop being decorative.
They aren't just things you do to look holy to your peers.
Right. They become matters of pure, unadulterated survival. While the practice of lament keeps the heart soft, a soft heart still needs a rigid structural framework to keep from collapsing entirely under the cumulative weight of decades of service. We need actual mechanics.
This brings us to the final, major segment of the manuscript, which explores the practical spiritual disciplines under extreme stress and the eternal horizon required to make those disciplines meaningful rather than just another checklist.
In calm, easy seasons, you might read your Bible or pray out of a sense of routine or intellectual curiosity or even duty.
But when you are in the furnace, these practices become the vital architecture that prevents the soul from caving in on itself. The text highlights 3 specific disciplines, reframing each one.
The first one is prayer.
But it specifically notes, not polished, performative, theologically perfect prayer, prayer as desperate, honest communion.
The text validates that gasps, tears, long stretches of silence, and groans, all of it counts as prayer when the pressure is too high for syntax.
Second is scripture. Not reading the text as material to harvest for your next sermon or leadership talk, but as a daily, desperate reorientation of reality.
Because when you are under severe stress, your brain actively lies to you.
It absolutely does.
It tells you that you are entirely alone, that the mission is a failure, and that the opposition is insurmountable. Scripture acts as an external anchor, reminding your panicked nervous system of what is actually eternally true.
Exactly. And the third survival discipline is Sabbath, or rest.
I have to jump in here because this is where I constantly fail. It is so incredibly counterintuitive to rest when everything around you feels like it is actively burning down.
It goes against every instinct.
The natural adrenaline-fueled instinct is to work harder, push longer, answer one more email, solve one more crisis, outwork the opposition.
But the text drops this heavy, convicting truth. It states that chronic exhaustion is not a sign of holiness.
It calls the refusal to rest a quiet, arrogant form of unbelief.
It's a refusal to accept our created human limits. When you refuse to rest, you are functionally acting like you are the one holding the universe together, not God.
That is a staggering realization for highly driven, ambitious people.
Burnout is very rarely the result of simply working too many hours. Burnout is the psychological result of treating the fragile clay vessel as if it were the infinite, indestructible treasure.
To synthesize how we survive this, the manuscript roots its final argument back in Paul's second letter to the Corinthians, chapter 4, verses 16 through 18, introducing the concept of the inner versus outer self.
Paul writes, "So we do not lose heart. Though our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day."
Let's be real about the outer self. It is wasting away.
We are talking about the physical realities of aging, the physiological toll of chronic stress, emotional burnout, cognitive decline. It is the undeniable decay of the human machine.
It is the unavoidable reality of living as a finite creature in a fractured world.
But the profound promise of the text is that the inner self, the invisible eternal architecture of the soul, its core connection to Christ, can be systematically renewed daily through those very survival disciplines of raw prayer, grounding scripture, and defiant rest.
And all this endurance is ultimately anchored by what theologians call eschatological hope.
Paul goes on to measure his life, calling his horrific catalog of beatings, shipwrecks, and betrayals a light and momentary affliction, which is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison.
And as the text is very careful to clarify, Calling trauma light and momentary is not Paul gaslighting himself.
He isn't saying the pain is small or insignificant in the present moment.
He is saying that the glory coming is infinitely heavier and it lasts infinitely longer.
Exactly. It is a matter of profound cosmic scales. You place the totality of your earthly pain on one side of the scale, and you place the eternal reality of God's presence on the other, and eternity simply outweighs it.
This specific eschatological hope is what fuels the quiet, unglamorous nobility of what the author calls the sacred work of staying.
The sacred work of staying, yes. Think of the faithful missionary who labors for 40 years in a remote village with very few converts.
Think of the obscure pastor of a tiny aging congregation who faithfully visits the sick week after week.
Think of the exhausted parent raising a child with severe special needs.
These are people who stay in the obscurity and remain faithful when it would be so much easier, so much more logical to the modern mind to simply pack up, abandon the calling, and find an easier life.
They are sustained by the deep, unshakable conviction that hidden, unapplauded labor is intimately seen by God, and that the severe refinement they are undergoing in the forge is precisely what is expanding their soul's capacity to eventually carry eternal glory.
It perfectly clarifies the fundamental difference between burnout and refinement.
Burnout is often just the result of our own mismanagement, our refusal to rest, and our arrogance in exceeding our human capacity.
Refinement, however, is God deliberately exposing the truth of our frailty in order to rebuild us on a stronger foundation.
And the wisdom to know the difference, knowing whether you simply need to take a nap and drink a glass of water, or whether you need a profound theological reorientation of your motives, that discernment is the ultimate hallmark of a mature, tested, and forged calling.
It is the ultimate goal of the deep dive we've taken today. To recognize that the fire is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of the actual work.
It really is.
Wow. We have covered an incredible expanse of ground today, from the psychological traps of our own ambition to the brutal realities of the ancient world. To summarize this massive journey for you, the listener, the core, undeniable takeaway is this. A true, enduring calling is never proven in the climate-controlled comfort of the launch pad. It is only forged in the intense, disorienting heat of the furnace.
When the pressure hits, when the money stops, when the people leave, it isn't God rejecting you. It is God meticulously refining you.
You do not have to be an indestructible titanium vault to be profoundly used by the creator of the universe. You simply have to be willing to hold the infinite, radiant treasure of His grace in your fragile, ordinary, easily chipped clay jar.
And to leave you with one final, lingering thought to mull over as you step back into whatever forge you are currently facing. We spend so much of our limited time, our frantic energy, and our deep anxiety trying to constantly glue the broken pieces of our cracked clay jars back together.
We hide our flaws, desperately hoping that no one notices the fractures in our lives or our leadership.
But consider this. What if the crack in your vessel isn't a failure to be hidden? What if that specific agonizing crack is the exact, deliberate aperture God designed so that His specific light could finally shine through you to a world sitting in the dark?
What if the crack is the aperture? That is a beautiful, profound place to end. The forge is hot, but the light is real. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredibly deep dive. Embrace the furnace, lean heavily into the grays, and whatever you do, keep going.